Welcome back to the Nerdy Grail, and today we are going to be discussing the Shrek franchise because, as you know, earlier this year, in February, we got the cast announcement teaser trailer for Shrek 5, which showed off the animation, which showed off how it's going to look, gave us a brief glimpse of what the plot could potentially be, and showed us the cast for the movie. But obviously, it has been delayed once again, and now Shrek 5, which was originally coming out in Christmas 2026, is now coming out on June 30th, 2027, at a bit of a peak season for movies. So will it survive? Who knows? Obviously, ever since Shrek 5 was first announced, it's caused people to stir. It's caused people to think, what on earth is going to happen? And then when they did the cast announcement trailer, people were obviously going ham on how the characters looked. Me, myself, I did a reaction to that. So if you'd like to check that out, it's already up on my channel. But in today's video, I thought I would discuss the Shrek franchise as a whole. So everything from the 2001 Shrek movie all the way up to and discussing my thoughts on Shrek 5. I will go over again my thoughts on the animation style, anything to do with the plot maybe. I will look at some articles talking about the delay that's happening again with it, and what are my predictions for the movie. So we're going to be discussing Shrek 1, Shrek 2, Shrek the Third, Shrek Forever After. We will also be discussing the two spin-off Puss in Boots movies, so Puss in Boots and Puss in Boots The Last Wish. I think we can all agree that the Shrek franchise is a bit of like a cult classic franchise at this point, which has, had spin-offs, has had mini-movies, loads, tons of merch. I've got all my steelbooks and 4Ks behind me of Shrek. I've got Funko Pops of Shrek. I've got a Funko Pop of Puss in Boots. I've even got a Funko Pop of Donkey. You cannot escape the Shrek franchise. And, it was inevitable that Shrek 5 was going to be made. But anyway, let's not waste any more time. Let's dive straight into discussing the Shrek franchise as a whole, because we can all agree it was a bit of a roller coaster. Some good movies, some bad movies, and some fantastic movies. So, I think we need to go back to where it all began, back in 2001, and have a little look at Shrek 1. Okay, so I think we can all agree that when it comes to Shrek 1, back in 2001, 24 years ago this movie came out, I think we can all agree that it is still a fun movie that for the most part, and at least in my opinion anyway, it still holds up as one of the strongest animated movies today. It is a fun movie with a cast of characters that really take you from point A to point B, carry you through a franchise, and they do such a good job that the actors and actresses that play these roles, they're almost as popular as the actual characters themselves, to the point where you can't envision anyone else playing those roles. Like, for example, Mike Myers is Shrek. Cameron Diaz is Fiona. Eddie Murphy is Donkey. You can't envision anyone else doing those roles or tackling those roles. And I think that's when a movie is also done right, when the character and the actor or actress playing them are one in the same and are one with each other, and that's perfect with Shrek. I also think that the animation style is still really perfect. I don't think personally it's that dated. I can still watch Shrek and still see it as quite a visual masterpiece for the time. And even going forward now in 2025, I think that Shrek 1 holds up really well and actually looks better than some movies that we get today, if I'm perfectly honest. But obviously, the cast has grown in Shrek. Like, obviously, we've got a very, very basic level of cast in this movie compared to what we got now. There's not near enough as many characters, and obviously some more fan-favourite characters also came later in the series. Because obviously, Shrek 1, you mainly focus on Shrek and Donkey and Fiona, because Shrek's home has been invaded by fairy tale creatures, such as characters like the Three Blind Mice, the Big Bad Wolf from Little Red Riding Hood, Pinocchio. You've got all these other characters, these fairy tale creatures whose land has been taken off them, who's been shoved to the side, shoved in Shrek's swamp by Lord Farquaad, who is a fantastic antagonist for this movie. Really memorable, really funny. Despite his size, he has a massive impact on the story and is brilliant from start to finish. There's a lot of adult humour in this as well. There is one scene in particular in Shrek 1, if you know what it is, you know what it is. Lord Farquaad in bed with the magic mirror asking to see Fiona, and then he has a little peek. If you know, you know. It's very for the adults. And I think that's quite fun as well about Shrek, is there's stuff in it for the kids and there's stuff in it for the adults. So it is a family film that everyone can enjoy. And I really like Shrek 1. The plot of Shrek and Donkey going out to save Princess Fiona from this tower, which is guarded by a dragon, in order to get her to Lord Farquaad so that Lord Farquaad will kick all the fairy tale creatures out of Shrek's swamp so he can have his home back. I think, simple plot, but works really well. You learn that there's a secret with Fiona, that actually she's cursed to turn into an ogre at night, and she's a beautiful princess during the day, but Shrek ends up falling for her, and obviously, at the end of the movie, Shrek and Fiona end up getting together, breaking the curse, and it turns out that she becomes an ogre permanently as well, because she takes on love's true form, which she loves Shrek, and so her true form is to be an ogre like Shrek. But obviously, along the way, Shrek bumps into Donkey, played by Eddie Murphy, who is your comic relief for the movie, and he is funny. He can be seen as annoying, but I think he is hilarious, and Shrek and Donkey work off each other really, really well. Cameron Diaz as Fiona is also fantastic, and like I said, John Lithgow as Lord Farquaad is brilliant. Simple premise for a movie, but a fun premise for a movie, and sets up your franchise going forward in a big way and gives you means to expand upon it, because we didn't get to meet Fiona's parents, discover why she ended up in the tower. There's ways of progressing the story, and that's exactly what they then do going forward in terms of Shrek 2, which is the movie that we are going to quickly move on and discuss briefly now. And equally as popular, if not more popular, 3 years later in 2004, we had the amazing Shrek 2, which for many people, including myself, it is a lot of people's favourite movie out of the 4 Shrek movies, either this one or the first one. A lot of people do turn to this one because it is just Shrek 1, but with extra characters and new settings, and done in a fantastic way. Like I said last time, there was questions that we wanted answered. Why was Fiona locked away in the tower? And we do get some answers in this new movie because it expands the lore of Shrek. So in this movie, obviously, Shrek and Fiona, happily married. However, they do get an invitation to go and visit Fiona's parents. So King Harold and Queen Lillian, played by the fantastic Julie Andrews and John Cleese, to the kingdom of far, far away. So obviously it's like a meet the parents style movie where Shrek is nervous. What are the king and queen going to think of him being an ogre? And obviously now that their daughter has now become an ogre herself, so they travel to far, far away in order to meet the parents. And it is revealed over lots of confrontations and through some of the new characters introduced that Fiona was actually locked away under the guidance of her fairy godmother, who, the fairy godmother, played by Jennifer Saunders, is a fantastic antagonist. She's so sassy, so quirky, is really, really good. And it's just an interesting take on the fairy godmother. But yeah, locked away under her guidance to protect her from the kingdom. And eventually there was a bit of a deal struck that her son, Prince Charming, played by, again, the brilliant Rupert Everett, who is brilliant in this movie, he's really, really good, that he would be the one to go and save Fiona, true love's kiss, and he would marry into royalty, this, that, and the other. But obviously that doesn't go to plan when Shrek gets in the way, and so Fairy Godmother tries to take Shrek out of the picture. One of the ways in which this film is a lot more unique is it also introduces us to another one of the core cast members of Shrek, who, even though he wasn't in the first movie, he is just as popular as characters like Donkey, Fiona, or Shrek himself. I'm, of course, talking about Antonio Banderas joining the cast in this one as Puss in Boots, a little henchman hired by the king initially in order to take out Shrek, but ends up losing to Shrek and ends up basically joining Shrek's crew and becoming one of his best friends alongside Donkey. And he's a fantastic addition. Again, he's not quite the comedic relief. He sort of flutters between being serious and being quite a comedic character. And obviously him being a cat as well, he flutters between, a bit like if you've watched Family Guy with Brian, where there's moments where Brian acts like a dog and then acts like a person. Puss in Boots does the same thing, really. Acts like a proper warrior, proper person, and then will do like a cat thing where he'll lick his behind or he'll drink milk or this, that, and the other. He's a great addition to the cast. But another reason why this film stands out the most is because this film revolves around Shrek not being entirely happy with himself and how he looks and the fact that he's an ogre and the fact that the king and queen don't fully accept him. And so he ends up breaking into the fairy godmother's cottage, which is like a factory where she has like potions and spells to give people what they want, and ends up turning himself and Donkey into a human and a stallion, you know, a more beautiful version of themselves, in order to think that's the way he can impress Fiona. So it's quite a unique take on it, really. And you got, like I said, some great additions to the cast with the king, the queen, the fairy godmother, Prince Charming, and of course Puss in Boots. They also give people like the gingerbread man and the big bad wolf more things to do, the three blind mice, so they're really expanding on things. Pinocchio as well, you know, the prison escape scene where they cause Pinocchio to tell a lie in order to get the keys across to uncuff them when Shrek and all are kidnapped is brilliant. Like I said, and visually, again, just as strong as the first movie. And like I said, the new setting of Far, Far Away and like the Enchanted Forest and the fairy godmother's factory cottage where she makes all the spells and potions is really, really good. And for me, like I said, Shrek 2 is probably my favourite of the 4 Shrek movies, not including, obviously, the Puss in Boots movies, but it is really, really strong. However, we then need to move forward a couple of years and take a little look at the third movie in the franchise, known as Shrek The Third. Still following the same pattern 3 years later, in 2007, we got the release of Shrek The Third, which unfortunately does, for an awful lot of people, have a bit of a reputation for being the weakest in the Shrek saga. And I can sort of see why, because it doesn't really do a lot to further the lore of Shrek per se, but it does introduce us to a new side of Shrek and also to some new characters who are quite prevalent in the 4th movie and what might be important in the 5th movie, who knows, depending on where the plot goes from here. But the 3rd movie follows on from Prince Charming's defeat in the 2nd Shrek movie, the defeat of Prince Charming and the fairy godmother. The fairy godmother's gone. Prince Charming, again played by Rupert Everett, is sort of angry at Shrek and so wants revenge on Shrek. And that's basically what it is he just wants revenge on Shrek. However, sadly, in this movie, King Harold does sadly pass away. So, unfortunately, we lose King Harold. And so the whole point is that Shrek is sort of made to believe that he obviously has to be the next heir to the throne and so take on the responsibilities of being king. He struggles to do that initially and so asks if there's anyone else who possibly could do the role instead of him, and they say that there's only one other person, and so they introduce us to Arthur Pendragon, played by Justin Timberlake. And so Shrek has to go on a quest in order to bring Arthur to Far, Far Away so he can take over as King of Far, Far Away. And that is basically the premise of the movie. But there is a subplot of the movie where we find out that Fiona is actually pregnant. And so Shrek then needs to also come to the realization that he's potentially going to be a dad and whether or not he's actually going to be a good dad or not. So that's a bit of extra internal conflict that they've also got going on throughout the movie. And like I said, in terms of additions to the cast, there's not actually an awful lot. Like I said, they introduce us to Arthur Pendragon, played by Justin Timberlake. They also introduce us to the character of Merlin, played by Eric Idle. And then they also introduce us to some other princesses that you might know through Disney and that sort of thing, such as like Cinderella, Rapunzel, Snow White, you know, all played by fantastic actresses themselves, like Amy Sedaris and Amy Puglia. You know, some fantastic actors, Maya Rudolph, you know, there's some great names in here, and they become like a band of these like fighters who help to defend Far, Far Away with Fiona when they're under attack by Charming and his little goons of witches and stuff. But the relationship you sort of get between Shrek and Arthur is a little bit annoying. Like, Arthur is seen as quite this meek, feeble character who wouldn't be fit to lead. He's sort of got to earn his right, so to speak. You know, they sort of do a bit like Sword in the Stone style, where, you know, the one who's least likely to be king ends up showing that they're worth being king in the end. And also in comparison to the previous Shrek movies, like the final confrontation in this movie is very weak in comparison. Like the first movie, you've got the grand gesture of Shrek crashing a wedding and having that big showdown with all the knights and Lord Farquaad. In the second movie, you've got Shrek taking on the fairy godmother, with the giant gingerbread man trying to storm the castle. But in this movie, it's sort of a play where Shrek is like chained up on a stage and Prince Charming is basically trying to reenact saving Fiona and then will slay Shrek at the end and humiliate him on stage. It's sort of done really weird. But at the end of the movie, you do get the birth of Shrek's 3 kids, which, like I said, they are probably the most prominent in the additions to the cast. The babies of Felicia, Farkle and Fergus. They don't really obviously do a lot apart in this movie, apart from obviously giving Shrek some internal conflict about whether he'll be a good dad or not. It's obviously then in the future movies where they play a little bit more of a role. I'd say overall, yeah, Shrek 3 is a bit of a fun one. They do a bit of a body swap at one point as well, with Puss and Donkey swapping bodies for probably about 20 minutes of the movie, after a spell goes wrong through Merlin, which, that's interesting. Donkey is obviously Puss is in Donkey's body and so tries to do the generic thing of Puss trying to be cute, and that doesn't work because Donkey's seen as ugly, which is really cruel. But yeah, it's interesting, but it's nowhere near as good as the previous 2 movies, at least in my opinion. But I still have fun with Shrek the Third. I would say it's still a fun movie and definitely worth checking out, even though it doesn't add an awful lot to the Shrek lore in comparison to the first 2. But then obviously we had another couple of years where we had what we thought was going to be the final Shrek movie, and so I will now move on and talk about Shrek 4 or Shrek Forever After. Shrek 4 or Shrek The Final Chapter or Shrek Forever After, which came out in 2010, so still sticking to 3 years between each movie. This was what we originally believed was going to be probably the last of the Shrek films, and they really made a big effort to push that out there through trailers and also through watching the movie itself. You sort of got that feeling that this is a good way to wrap up Shrek's story and the franchise as a whole, to be honest. So it starts off by going sort of back in time again. So the king and the queen, they've locked Fiona away in the tower under the guidance of the fairy godmother. They're unsure what to do. They don't know if it was the right call to make. They don't know if she'll ever really be saved. And so they go to this old abandoned area and they seek a deal with Rumpelstiltskin, who is a fantastic antagonist in this movie. I must admit, Shrek, in terms of the antagonist, for the most part anyway, knows how to handle an antagonist, and Rumpelstiltskin is fantastic. He's creepy, he's slimy, he's really, really evil. He's really not one to be trusted, and they make that clear from the get-go. And he's got this pet goose called Fifi who hisses and snaps. It's really interesting, to be honest. I quite like it. But they go to make a deal with him that, obviously you'll agree to help our daughter, but obviously, in return, Rumpelstiltskin wants to become king, wants them to hand over their land and the kingdom to them. Just before they sign it, they overhear that Shrek has saved Fiona. And so then Rumpelstiltskin obviously loses out on the deal and then, again, a bit like Charming, seeks vengeance on Shrek, wishing that the ogre was never born. Going back to Shrek, Shrek is now a dad with his 3 children, Felicia, Farkle and Fergus. He's struggling to come to terms with that his ogre lifestyle is now changed and is different, and he misses when he was feared and when people used to run away or chase him with pitchforks and torches. He's now your stay-at-home dad who's seen as very cutesy and not threatening. And so he sort of explodes at their birthday party and sort of says that he wishes for one day that he could be a normal ogre again. Rumpelstiltskin overhears this, tricks Shrek into signing a contract saying, give me a day from your past and I'll let you be an ogre again. Shrek signs it without fully reading the fine print, finds out that his world's turned upside down, nobody knows who he is, far, far away, he's gone to hell, and it turns out that Rumpelstiltskin stole a day when he was a baby, the day that he was born, meaning that once the day's up, Shrek will be no more. So he's wiped Shrek from existence. So you get to see, it from a new light, and you get to see Shrek from a new light. Him come to terms that actually he does care about his friends. He misses his family. He actually values his family more than being an ogre. And he was, he wasn't thinking clearly at the time. And so he has to sort of recruit his old friends, recruit Donkey, recruit Puss, recruit Fiona, try and, get Fiona to fall in love with him again. Because apparently, and this is always the case in these films, true love's kiss is the only thing that could reverse the spell. So he has to try and get Fiona to fall in love with him again. But the reason that she fell in love with him the first time was because he saved her and sort of built that bond on their journey back to the castle. Whereas this time she saved herself and so doesn't really see Shrek in the same way. So it's a lot tougher. And it's very dramatic and very dark. In comparison to the previous three Shrek movies, it's a completely different tone. Obviously, animation and all still done the same. The humour for the most part's done the same, but they do take it in a lot of a more of a darker tone. And Shrek almost doesn't make it in this movie as well. He does kiss Fiona, but he then fades away, a bit like the Thanos snap in the MCU. He doesn't make it. But then apparently the kiss just magically worked before he faded away, and it reverts everything back to the way it was, and you get a bit of a happily ever after where Shrek gets the life back that he had, all of his friends, and he's grateful for what he has. But it was interesting to see, Donkey not know who Shrek is. Puss in Boots is not the crazy cat swordsman that everyone knows. He's this big fat house cat who just drinks milk and sleeps all day, You get to see Far, Far Away in a different light. And I think that's quite nice, And you get to revisit the castle with the dragon from the first movie. So everything does come full circle in this, which is quite nice. Like I said, Rumpelstiltskin is quite a good villain, to be honest. But we thought then that was going to be the end for the Shrek franchise. It did get a bit of mixed reviews. Some people really loved it, some people weren't too keen. But we thought this might be the end for the Shrek franchise. But they did say that spin-offs were still on the cards. And that is where the Puss in Boots movies come in. Because literally only a year later, we got the release of the first Puss in Boots movie. So let me pause this and I will jump straight into discussing the Puss in Boots spin-off movies. 2011 rolls around and we get the first spin-off movie, which goes into the origins of Antonio Banderas as Puss in Boots, which was a really, really good movie. This, in terms of the timeline, is believed that it takes place before he actually met Shrek and Donkey, so before the events of Shrek 2. So after the events of this movie, he then goes off and at some point will be hired by the king in order to meet up with Shrek. So you don't get any references to Shrek per se in this, but it is fun to see the early years of Puss in Boots, where he's, this little kitten who grows up in an orphanage where in San Ricardo is the hometown for this movie, and he makes friends with this egg known as Humpty Dumpty. So if you know the rhymes and the fairy tales, he makes friends with Humpty Dumpty who become best friends, who will are like brothers, really, so they'll do anything for each other. But one night, Humpty betrays Puss, and they end up robbing a bank, and so their friendship ties get cut, and then many, many years go by. Puss is a bit more grown up. Puss has also been banished from the town due to stealing or being, tied up with Humpty, so he's no longer welcome in San Ricardo. He does eventually return and bumps into a character known as Kitty Softpaws, who is a fantastic addition to the cast. And I love Puss and Kitty's relationship bouncing off each other. It turns out that Kitty Softpaws is also working with Humpty Dumpty, Humpty Dumpty's played by Zach Galifianakis, who's really, really good and quite funny in the role as well, and also plays quite a serious... You don't know where you stand with Humpty. You don't know whether he's a goofball or whether there's something more going on, and it turns out that there is something more going on. So Humpty wants to try and get back with Puss because he wants to try and find this secret of this golden goose and golden egg in order to try and pay back the town and make amends with Puss, supposedly. And so they go on this adventure to try and steal these magic beans, grow a beanstalk, go up a beanstalk, and steal this treasure of a golden goose that lays golden eggs to pay back the people of San Ricardo for everything that they stole and try and make amends with each other. So it's the plot of Jack and the Beanstalk as well tied in. But they also hunted down by the antagonists of Jack and Jill. Jack played by Billy Bob Thornton and Jill played by Amy Sedaris, who are... They're not built out as young children or very meek and feeble. They are both quite large, quite deep-voiced, quite fearing characters. They make them like almost like outlaws to fear and be worried about. And so they are then chasing them down on their journey to find this beanstalk and find the golden goose and the golden egg. But the plot twist is that all along is that Humpty Dumpty has actually not forgiven Puss, is still holding a grudge, and actually is working with Jack and Jill and is doing it in order to steal the money, him be the hero and Puss be, you know, further humiliated and his name pushed through the mud, because Humpty cannot forgive Puss for abandoning him in his time of need, even though Puss feels like Humpty tricked him, and so they're both feeling hurt. I mean, all the while, Puss is sort of falling for Kitty Softpaws, who's played by the brilliant Salma Hayek, who she's fantastic in everything that she does, but does really good in Kitty Softpaws, this master thief who she's lost her claws, but she has paws so soft that she's able to steal things from people without them even feeling or knowing about it. And that's done a lot for jokes, you know, stealing Puss's boots, stealing his sword, stealing his hat, done to steal the magic beans. It's really, really good, and I quite like it. And it's quite nice to have a different take on the Shrek franchise. They still use the same animation style from the 4 Shrek movies, so you feel like it still fits in. And also with Antonio Banderas still playing Puss in Boots, it's also done really, really well, so you don't feel the disconnect. And knowing that this comes before all the events of Shrek as well, it doesn't tamper with any timeline things or how Puss would act, you know, post Shrek 2, you know, because this is pre-Shrek 2. But we then, after this movie, did have a very long gap with only like little mini shorts. We didn't have any proper movies for a very long time, until that is when they decided to do a sequel to Puss in Boots titled Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. Fast forward then 11 years to the tail end of 2022 for some places and the start of 2023 for other places. We got the sequel to Puss in Boots titled Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And this, if I'm being perfectly honest, is probably my favourite movie in the entire Shrek franchise. If I'm including the Shrek movies and the spin-offs, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is my favourite in terms of animation style. I think it is perfect. It's like got that Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse vibe of animation, where the characters are still recognisable from the original movies, but they've like done a bit of an update to it. I like it. I think it's fantastic. I think the settings and the locations in this movie are brilliant. I think all the characters are done brilliantly, both the protagonists and the antagonists, and there's many antagonists. I think the pacing is done very, very well, and the plot is interesting. So basically the plot of this movie, and in terms of where this comes, it's a bit up in the air, but this does take place post the events of Shrek 4, because you do get cameos from Shrek characters, and Puss does remember his time with Shrek, Donkey, Fiona, etc. But roughly I believe they say this is roughly around 10 years after the events of Shrek 4. So far in the future, and in a post-credit scene, well, not a post-credit scene, the tail end of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish shows Puss in Boots, Perito, his new friend, and Kitty Softpaws heading back to far, far away, in Puss's words, to see some old friends, and they start playing the old Shrek music. So he's going back to see Shrek. But the whole plot of this movie is Puss is basically on his last life. You know, the cats have 9 lives, so to speak. He's wasted most of his lives. He's on his last life, and now death is coming after him. And he's heard of this great wishing star that can grant any wish, and he wants to try and wish back his lives so that he's the almighty Puss in Boots again, who has all 9 lives to spare. And along the way, he reunites with Kitty Softpaws and new friend Perito, this little dog, in order to get to find this lost wishing star, all of them having their own individual wishes, but obviously encounters some problems along the way in the form of the main antagonists of this movie, and there is many. The first one, you've got Florence Pugh, who plays Goldilocks, so you've got Goldilocks and the 3 bears coming, so Mama Bear, Baby Bear, and Papa Bear, played by some really big-name people. Like, for example, Papa Bear is played by Ray Winston, which I think is in really good casting. Olivia Colman playing Mama Bear. She's in everything, but she does a fantastic job. And Samson Kayo playing Baby Bear. So all of them perfectly cast. You've then got John Mulaney as Jack Horner, who is such a good villain. He is fantastic. You know, he's slimy, he's sinister, he's very passive aggressive. You know, he doesn't care about anyone but himself. And I think that's really, really good, especially when your plot is to use a wish to get what you want, and he'll do anything in order to get that. I think that's done really well. But the star villain of this movie, the star of this whole movie, is the wolf, who we learn is actually deaf, coming to claim Puss in Boots, because he's like, you wasted the previous lives, let me just get this last one early for you. You know, you're not really going to use it properly, I might as well just save us the time and the hassle, and I'll claim it now. And all through the movie, he's chasing Puss. There's numerous times where Puss stops, he hears this little creepy whistle, his fur stands on end, he turns, and Death is just there in the background, basically like, come on now, time is short, you know, I'm coming for you. Fantastic, brilliant, creepy, sinister, dark, love it. One of the best villains in any movie, still to this date for me. He would easily be in like a top 5 favourite villains of any movie for me. And that's really mad to say, coming, you know, from the Shrek franchise, you know? But yeah, Puss in Boots: The Last Wish is thoroughly entertaining. I love the movie. Obviously, by the end of the movie, they do, obviously, every character has a wish. Goldilocks has a wish, Jack Horner has a wish. You know, they all have wishes. And by the end of the movie, Puss doesn't, obviously, he doesn't use his wish. You know, he learns to honour his last life. You know, he learns a new moral for the story, you know. But yeah, it's a very, very good movie. I highly recommend checking out Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. But yeah, so with the end of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish teasing the return of the rest of the Shrek crew, like Shrek and Donkey and all, where do we stand now? Well, obviously, we've got Shrek 5. So, let me just pause this, and what we're going to do is we're going to go over to an article from the BBC and sort of discuss our thoughts on Shrek 5, where it's at, and what on earth is going on with this movie. Okay then, so we have got this BBC article talking about Shrek 5 and the release date being pushed back for the second time. So it's important to note that the first date that we were given for Shrek 5 was it was originally due to come out in July 2026. Then they pushed it back, saying, when we got the cast announcement trailer, saying that it was actually going to come out then Christmas 2026. But now recently, in the last week or two, it has been told to us again that Shrek 5 is going to be delayed once again, this time being pushed back to June 30th, 2027, which I think is absolutely insane and is not going to do this film any particular favours. There's lots of theories and stuff going out around as to why this film has been delayed, which we'll talk about a couple of my theories and other people, what I've heard now in a moment. But here we are. Shrek 5 release date delayed for second time. We got that picture of the new, you know, designs for the characters and the animation with Fiona, Donkey, Shrek, and Felicia. Where's Fergus and Farkle, by the way? Why were they not shown? That's a concern for mine straight away. But it says, the new movie will be the first Shrek film, not including spin-offs, since the release of Shrek Forever After in 2010. So, on the 12th of August, 2025, the much-anticipated release of Shrek 5 has been delayed for a second time. DreamWorks Animation originally scheduled the sequel for next summer, but pushed it back to December 2026. So there we are, the July schedule, and then got pushed to December. It has now shifted the release back further to June 2027, according to US website Deadline, but that has come out in lots of other places as well. BBC Newsbeat has approached DreamWorks Animation and Universal to comment. So this is just an image of them from the first movie, which, yeah, you can see how the change in the design, look here, the comparison between the two. I'm all for change, you know, and obviously it's been, like I said, 24 years, so some change is needed, but I'm sorry. It's just not on for me. I'm not a huge fan, especially the outfit. I think I could maybe get past the faces eventually. The outfit change is not needed. But says, so although the report didn't give a reason, fans and news outlets have speculated that the delay was to avoid competing with Avengers Doomsday, Dune Part 3 and Ice Age 6, which are all set to hit cinemas in December 2026. So yeah, okay, that was one reason I was possibly going to talk about is, yes, I think Avengers Doomsday and was probably maybe a potential reason for delaying it. I definitely wouldn't say that is the full reason, not by a long shot, but I think maybe they probably looked at the schedule and thought, are we going to really do well compared to a film like Avengers Doomsday? I'm not sure. Fans have expressed disappointment for the delay, with one writing on X, another delay. At this point, my kids will be showing Shrek 5 to their kids. The first film, released in 2001, followed the story of an ogre who wants nothing more than to be left alone, but ends up on a quest to rescue a princess trapped in a tower. Along the way, he gets help from a ragtag bunch of misfits, including a chatty donkey and later a boot-wearing cat. It was a huge hit for DreamWorks, making $487 million, or £362 million worldwide at the box office. The studio then went on to bring back the characters again and again for 3 more movies. Number 5 will be the 7th in the franchise, which includes 2 spin-offs, Puss in Boots and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. It has also been confirmed that Shrek, voiced by Mike Myers, Princess Fiona, voiced by Cameron Diaz, and Donkey, voiced by Eddie Murphy, are all returning for the new movie, which, like I said, is great, and I'm glad we're getting that. The movie's trailers also revealed a new addition to the cast, Fiona and Shrek's teenage daughter, Felicia, voiced by actress Zendaya. However, the reaction to the clip was mixed, with some fans taking to X to say they didn't like the new style of animation and it was ugly. Some have compared the reaction to the original movie version of Sonic the Hedgehog, which Paramount Pictures changed in response to backlash in 2019. Others couldn't be more excited about the return to the kingdom of far, far away. So this is what the article has said about Shrek 5 and the delay. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to come back together with you guys. We're going to discuss Shrek 5 and I'm going to give some of my thoughts as to why I think Shrek 5 has been delayed and whether or not I'm really excited for it. Okay, so after reading that article, look, let's be real here about Shrek 5. It is a little bit of a mess and a little bit of a disaster. This is a film that has been discussed pretty much since we've started getting spin-offs with the Puss in Boots movies. It was like teetered around, oh, could they maybe do a Shrek 5? Is this going to happen? And then as the years went on, you got later and later, and then it became more likely. And then when they officially confirmed it, it was mixed. People were excited. Some people thought, did we really need it? A bit like Toy Story 4. Is this really necessary? The 4th movie sort of wrapped everything up. And then obviously when we got the announcement that the original cast are still coming back, we were, a little bit optimistic and hopeful, thinking, at least they haven't changed the characters. We've got the originals here. They'll do the characters justice. They know what we like. They've played them multiple times. So that gave us a little bit of hope. But then when we saw, obviously, the cast announcement trailer, saw the different animation style, the different design for the characters, the introduction and introducing of Zendaya into the cast as well, and also what they told us so far, and as far as we're aware, no Antonio Banderas, meaning no Puss in Boots in Shrek 5 as far as we're aware, which is ridiculous, by the way, considering at the end of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish, he was literally setting up Shrek's return, of he's about to enter far, far away, so why no Puss in Boots? And also Puss in Boots, in my eyes, is probably one of the most loved characters of the franchise, if I'm honest. More so than Shrek, I think. But yeah, so I just think it was ridiculous. So in terms of why I think the film's been delayed, there's numerous reasons. Obviously, one of them was discussed in the article. The fact that obviously it was going up against films like Dune 3, Avengers Doomsday, and Ice Age 6, which, can I just say, Ice Age 6? Do we really need a 6th Ice Age movie? But, big films like Avengers Doomsday, I will say, potentially, yes, not your best scheduling choice to put it up against Avengers Doomsday, because Marvel fans and superhero fans are going to be scouring to go to that film. I'm going to be wanting to go to that film. And if they had to choose between Shrek 5 and Avengers Doomsday, they're probably going to choose Avengers Doomsday for the most part. So I think, yeah, that is definitely part of the reason. Another reason why I think it's delayed is because I've heard lots of things going out and around based on the trailer that we got, any potential leaks and stuff. People might have figured out the plot of the movie, and I think that could potentially be a reason for them delaying it, because they want to tweak stuff that apparently people might have actually figured out about the movie, and so obviously are concerned, and so want to do some changes to that. Which, if that's the case, then you need to not be so cliche in terms of how you advertise your movie, because then people are just going to piece it together. Because, think about it, the teaser trailer just showed Shrek doing these social media trends and stuff like that, and not being happy with it. It feels like it's trying to, it's trying to cater too much to the kids today, which is going to make it very dated later on. So obviously they're trying to cover their tracks a bit there. I think also they've heard like the outcry of the designs, and I think, obviously they even mentioned in that BBC article, Sonic the Hedgehog, fans had major outcry, and so the film Sonic the Hedgehog was then also delayed by around 6 to 8 months, where they changed the design of Sonic, and then we got an accurate Sonic design. So could they be delaying Shrek 5 in order to tweak the designs of the characters? And so when we get another reveal trailer, they might look a little bit more like the original characters that we know. That is definitely also a possibility that's on the cards. But also at the same time, could another reason be due to outcry that people have had in terms of characters that have been introduced and characters that are absent? Me obviously talking about how Felicia is the only one of Shrek's children in the teaser, when he's got 2 boys as well. Where are the other 2? And also the lack of Antonio Banderas. So are they going to try and do some reshoots or re-recordings and try and somehow get Puss in Boots into the movie? I mean, I would love that, and I think he definitely should, because otherwise we're just going to be waiting ages for, an answer to what happened at the end of Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. It's already been nearly 3 years since that movie. And now that Shrek 5 is not coming out for nearly another 2 years, we're talking like 5 to 6 years. It's getting more and more. So they need to tie things together. Otherwise, things get lost in translation. So there's a plethora of reasons. Am I excited for Shrek 5? I love this franchise, don't get me wrong. But obviously the teaser did sort of deflate me a little bit. And my excitement was sort of taken away. I want to be excited. And I'm hoping now that the delay is because they are answering all of our prayers and they are fixing things that people have complained about. And so now I do feel a bit more optimistic again. Obviously, I'm annoyed that they're delaying it yet again, delaying a film that was already delayed. But if they're doing it for the right reasons, then, hey, I'm excited for it. And hopefully Shrek 5 will be done justice, because otherwise it's going to tarnish a legacy of films that, for a lot of people, especially people like me who've grown up on these films, it's going to ruin our childhoods. But hopefully, and fingers crossed, that's not going to be the case. But that is going to be my video discussing the entire Shrek franchise, including the brand new Shrek 5 movie, when that eventually comes out. But I hope you did enjoy this video. If you did, please like it by giving a thumbs up and comment down your thoughts on the Shrek franchise and your thoughts on Shrek 5. When do you think it's eventually going to come out? Do you think it'll be delayed a 3rd time? And are you excited for it? And subscribe if you are new. But for now, this is the Nerdy Grail signing off. I hope you've had an amazing day, and I will see you all in the next video. Bye for now, everyone.